Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Bowles, the Education and Community Programming Director for La Jolla Music Society. I'm so happy to introduce you to Dr. Jennifer Walker, who has been here with us since Thursday, and she is taking us on a tour through Paris, back in time, and now tonight we'll be looking at the program for Beg, Borrow, and Steal. Dr. Walker is an assistant professor at West Virginia University, and we've been so glad having you here this SummerFest. I hope you come back.
Thank you. I hope you have me back. It's a great pleasure to be here for the final time this weekend. It's really nice to see some familiar faces again and some new ones in the crowd as well. So tonight, or this afternoon rather, we'll talk about the idea of influence and begging, borrowing, and stealing. In 1904, the music critic Paul Landormy asked the following questions to his public. What is it to be French in music? Does a musical tradition exist which can be called French? And where does this tradition begin? The French, and Parisians in particular, had long realized that music and the arts could serve as a powerful vessel through which modern, international, and distinctly French national identities could take shape. Landormy, however, was not the first to ask these questions, and he would be far from the last. The establishment of the Third Republic and the beginning of the Belle Époque in 1870 coincided with the end of the Franco-Prussian War, a military conflict that had decimated the country's infrastructure and pride. The new government encountered difficulty in establishing its new authority, especially in the face of a large conglomerate of Parisians who had grown increasingly disaffected with the national government during the war. When in 1871, members of the far-left National Guard killed 2 army soldiers, a 72-day-long period of radical socialist and revolutionary government began, known as the Paris Commune. It brought about a bloody conflict that led to additional casualties and deeper political divisions before things settled into the tenuous reality of Republican France. In the early 1880s, a government known as the Moral Order had taken control with policies intended to counteract the lingering turbulence of the Commune. By 1885, however, the parliamentary majority shifted from moderately conservative Republicans in favor of more radical politicians, such that the revanchiste Georges Boulanger, pictured here, was named Minister of War in 1889. Boulanger's anti-German creed was marked by an aggressive nationalism, undoubtedly exacerbated by the centenary of the 1789 Revolution, sought revenge for France's loss to Prussia. With a steadily growing base of supporters that counted many traditional Catholics and Royalists among its ranks, he was nearly successful in staging a coup that would have toppled the Republic. Republican leaders thus faced the difficult task of celebrating the Republic with all its numerous challenges on the domestic front, while at the same time projecting an idealized image of itself to the rest of the world. Artistic and musical success became a metaphor for French pride and progress. But what might musical success look like? How might it sound? What was the French musical future? Thinking about the future often requires reflecting on the past. When, in 1900, Paris was again chosen to host the World's Fair, the exhibits curated by the French state juxtaposed nostalgia for the nation's past with a forward-looking, future-driven momentum. On the right bank of the Seine, visitors could view newly assembled structures meant to evoke the rickety splendor of medieval architecture. They could wander the streets and purchase flowers and fruits from young girls dressed in period costume, or they could assemble in a small medieval church to hear concerts of Lassus and Allegri. Old Paris, Le Vieux Paris, as it was known, was a historically minded theme park that found itself right at home with the surprisingly numerous Catholic exhibits and pavilions that reminded visitors, foreign and French alike, of the country's storied Catholic heritage. On the stage of the Trocadero, audiences flocked to hear the fair's official concerts, the 10 state-subsidized concerts, where the music of the nation's most successful young composers was put on full display as a beacon of French musical progress and superiority. These showcase concerts, however, also hinted at the French past. Alongside Camille Saint-Saëns' Le Feu Céleste, a cantata celebrating electricity that was written expressly for the festivities, and Debussy's La Demoiselle Élue, The programs featured works that referenced the past. Some, like excerpts from Lully's Alceste and Clément Joniquin's Les Chants des Oiseaux, were legitimate examples of early music. Others, however, were new compositions that depicted meticulously chosen historical events that would highlight specific moments in French history. Théodore Dubois's Oratorio, Le Baptime de Clovis, for example, the baptism of Clovis, reminded the audience of, or at least introduced it to, Clovis's defeat of the Teutons, his baptism, his coronation as the first king of France, and the establishment of France as what was often described as the eldest daughter of the Catholic Church. At the World's Fair, then, the idea of what it meant to be French and how being French should sound depended just as much on the influence of the past as it did on the enticing novelties of the present. The process of defining what could be successfully thought of as French was fluid, dynamic, and often hotly contested amongst composers and writers in the press. Landaux's questions about musical Frenchness in 1904 became even more pronounced in the first decades of the 20th century, particularly during and after the First World War. Questions of how musical France would continue to define itself loomed large. Nostalgia remained just as pervasive a factor in sounding France as did the avant-garde, or what some have called the ultra-modern. Allegiances to Debussy, Ravel, or Erik Satie colored the Parisian soundscape. Indeed, Debussy's legacy was, as one scholar has explained it, a specter that hung over French music of the interwar period, a reference point against which new developments were constantly judged. At the same time, the application and expression of avant-garde ideologies and sounds in the search for the ultra-modern was often received controversially, for it was frequently perceived in a pejorative fashion in which it signified the very un-French or harmful external, read in this case German, influences that were frequently coded in racialized ways. Yet the music of this time resists such simplistic categorization and compartmentalizations. While the concept of novelty was at the heart of modernist discourse in French music, different groups of composers had opposing ideas of what precisely novelty was and how they might best incorporate it into their individual compositional styles. And though individual debates on aesthetics, sound, and ideology seem at first to variegate the musical landscape into separate, ill-defined, and unrelated strands, there was a consensus to be reached. Elements that were valued as truly French were shared between competing factions. The past then and its powerful influence on the present transformed music into a powerful site of nostalgic progress. While some French look back to a curated medieval past as a model for the future, others found the French Baroque to be the standard bearer for the nation's musical future. Others, in the years surrounding World War I, saw Debussy and his legacy as the only way forward. In many cases, however, it was the musical past that was evoked time and time again in the search for a unified French musical identity. Modern realizations of the country's idealized past through collective performances and communal recreations created new narratives of the Republic's modern existence. Such an evocation of the past through the language of the present offered an appealing avenue through which the Republic could rehabilitate its shattered image. Contemporary music could, in the words of Jan Pasler, embody fruitful relationships with the past, whether through imitation, appropriation, or assimilation. It suggested that the past had a value that could inform present-day thinking, including its music, that progress was not merely a continuous process of linear evolution, but something that could turn back on itself in order to propel itself forward, sort of like a spiral. The utility of the influence of the past then was entirely cultural and ideological. In a sense, the past was the present. This intersection of memory, however distant, and performance takes center stage this afternoon. Landaux's questions regarding Frenchness in music, though certainly crucial during the Belle Époque, had been asked even by those composers who would serve as aesthetic and sonic influences for later generations. Throughout a significant portion of the 17th century, for example, Italian music and the Italianate style were seen as anathema to its French counterparts. The distaste for Italian music was as much political as it was musical. as the court served for the principal venue through which foreign music could be cultivated in France, whether through the arrival of foreign ambassadors or foreign brides who often brought with them large retinues of staff, including musicians, brought them from their homelands. Political connections made by the court had major ramifications for French musicians. Italian musicians and composers became important members of the royal court, bringing with them the sounds and styles of Italian music. With the influx of Italian musicians came a strong desire to emulate the artistic achievements of Renaissance and Baroque Italy. Take, for example, the establishment of the Académie Française de Rome in 1666, to which young artists could be sent and then could bring their honed skills back to the French king. Even so, Italian influences were often resisted amidst strong anti-Italian factions in and around the French court, and this brought music into the larger debate about what it meant to be French and how being French should sound. As a young composer, François Couperin found it difficult to resist the popular appeal of Italian music. He was particularly taken with Arcangelo Corelli, a composer that had brought the new genre of the trio sonata to Italian and international acclaim. Pairing a continuo line with two violins, Corelli's trio sonatas harnessed the possibilities offered by what we now know as tonal harmony, and they prefigured what would later become the well-known sonata form. Couperin was well aware of the polarizing debates between pro- and anti-Italian factions, yet he took a more conciliatory approach. He did not, unlike many of his contemporaries, find Italian virtuosity to be incompatible with French lyricism, and as he aged, he began appropriating Corelli's style into his own music, primarily in an effort to demonstrate that the two styles were not mutually exclusive. Homogeneity was his goal, and in the last years of his life, he achieved it by composing a set of works that were published under the title Les Goûts Réunis, the Reunited Tastes. The reunited tastes, as it were embodied by two trio sonatas that crowned the collection. Two apotheoses that, highly programmatic in nature, musically depicted Apollo's welcoming of well-favored deceased musicians onto Mount Parnassus. The first, which you'll hear this afternoon, is made up of 7 movements that depicts Corelli's Apollonian reception. The first movement, Corelli arrives at the base of the mountain and asks the muses to receive him. They are charmed by his reception, and he is happy about that. He then drinks from the fountain of Hippocene. He is enthusiastic about his drink. He falls asleep. Then the muses wake him up and place him at Apollo's side, and he rejoices as one does. Here, the Italian and French influences are equally clear. The walking bass line that so characterized Corelli's Italian style predominates throughout, while the overtly programmatic nature of the work bespeaks its French provenance. And what I mean by programmatic is that the music depicts some sort of extra musical narrative that is clear, right? So here, for example, the third movement, and listen to the undulating features of the music as he drinks from the fountain. Right, you can sort of hear the rippling of the water in the fountain and the continuous movement of the music. Couperin's final apotheosis, an homage to Lully, fully reunites the Italian and French styles. The apotheosis is, for Couperin, the apex of musical perfection, created as it was in France. This was sort of a particularly French way of writing music at this time. Apollo persuades Lully, Couperin writes, that the reuniting of French and Italian tastes will lead to musical perfection. The abstract nature of the stylistic debate between France and its rival neighbor was embodied, at least for Couperin, in the very real forms of Corelli and Lully, masters of Couperin's past who could ensound the French present. The French Baroque, exemplified strongly by people like Couperin, Lully, and Rameau, was a past to which later French composers chose to aspire. Many believed the music from this period to be the best model through which innately French aesthetic values, including economy of means, simplicity, charm, and clarity could be achieved. During the early years of the Third Republic, when the nation was reeling from its loss in the war, performances of music written by French Baroque composers increased significantly. And the act of composing music that exemplified characteristics that could be classified as French became more important than ever. Camille Saint-Saëns was an active figure in French musical life during the 1870s, but his reputation was far from sterling. He was at once considered conservative and reactionary, and he often straddled a precarious line that separated the opinions of more conservative critics from those whose aesthetic inclinations were perhaps more forward-looking. He was a man of many faces. As a staunch Republican, he co-founded the Société Nationale de Musique in 1871 under the banner of Ars Gallica in an effort to encourage the composition and performance of music by living French composers. Though at the first of the Society's concerts, the program featured a piano suite by Alexis de Castillon entitled 5 pièces dans le style ancien, so 5 pieces in the ancient style. So at the same time as he's promoting brand new music, he's also promoting music that sort of ensounds the past. Simultaneously historicist and modern, for Saint-Saëns, Ars Gallica was an art that could be simultaneously influenced by its past and its present. He had a keen interest in rediscovering and reviving the musical traditions of Lully, Charpentier, and Couperin. As a pianist, he could often be heard performing their music, and he had been such a champion of Rameau's music that he was named the honorary president of the Société Rameau upon its founding in 1901. His septet in E-flat major embodies this Janus-faced understanding of what modern French music should be. Émile Lemoine, a mathematician and founder of the chamber music society La Trompette, had asked Saint-Saëns to compose a special piece for chamber ensemble featuring the trumpet for some time. This in order to justify the name of his society, yet Saint-Saëns was hesitant at first. He relented, and in 1881 the septet was completed. Its 4 movements, intended to evoke 17th century French dance forms, are played by an unusual ensemble made up of trumpet, 2 violins, viola, cello, double bass, and piano, right? One of those things is not like the others. The opening movement uses the model of the French overture, albeit loosely. Though the dotted rhythms so characteristic of the genre are missing here, Saint-Saëns nonetheless adheres to the general formal model in which an opening dotted rhythm fanfare-like section alternates with an extended passage of imitative fugal counterpoint. The second movement of Saint-Saëns is ode to the minuet, a triple-meter dance form favored by Lully in his operas and later by Bach and Handel in stylized dance suites. Sandwiched between the minuet and the final movement, a gavotte and fugue, is the intermède. Originally entitled Marche funèbre, the funeral march, the third movement's reference is to the intermedio, a 16th century theatrical interlude consisting of song and dance that took place between the acts of a play. Influence abounds here as a smooth lyrical melody unfolds over a bolero-style rhythm, a nod to both the work's general indebtedness to dance, but also to the French fascination with Spain during the fin de siècle. The septet concludes with a lively reference to the gavotte, a popular 18th century dance, followed closely by a fugue. Amidst a swath of references to the French past, Saint-Saëns retains his modern individualism, all the while prizing clarity over emotion. The septet was performed at Saint-Saëns' last public appearance as a pianist, shortly before his death, on the occasion of a celebration thrown by members of the Académie des Beaux-Arts in honor of his contributions to French music, contributions which were forged through a careful mélange of the past and the present. His contemporary Debussy was also drawn toward inspiration from the past, whether that past was the imagined past of the Fête Galante that I spoke about the other night, or the historical past of his musical predecessors. While Debussy might best be remembered as a harmonist, he was quite adept at the art of counterpoint, or the processes by which independent voice lines may be combined and the procedures through which they can move. His time at the Conservatoire began as a piano student, an endeavor in which he was quite successful, but it soon changed as his focus shifted from performance to composition. Though the stories of the tête-à-têtes between Debussy, his innovative approaches to composition, and his professors at the Conservatoire are well known, they didn't get along, spoiler alert. His time as a student there also brought about a musician who's quite skilled at both composing and performing complicated and intricate counterpoint. He wrote 4 fugues as part of his Prix de Rome applications. He performed Bach's Toccata in G minor, the Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue, and the first movement of Beethoven's Opus 111 Piano Sonata as part of his piano examinations. He was drawn to counterpoint, a particularly Baroque theoretical technique, and he was also attracted to writing music for 4-hand piano or piano duo that we heard the other night in the Petite Suite. These interests were combined in his transcription of Robert Schumann's 6 canonic etudes, a piece that was composed in 1845, shortly after Robert and his wife Clara moved to Dresden. Clara was Robert's pupil in the study of counterpoint, and the couple had also come into possession of a pedal piano attachment that they planned to use to improve their organ playing technique. Dating from the 18th century, a pedal piano is a piano that has a foot pedal board, not unlike those found on an organ. The Schumann's version of the instrument was a 16-foot-long pedal board spanning 2 octaves that fit underneath their standard grand piano, thereby allowing them to perform works written on 3 staves. The instrument was not new. Both Bach and Mozart owned one. Robert wrote this set of etudes in canon to exploit the capabilities of his new instrument. The canon, a compositional technique in which an initial melody is imitated at a specific duration by other voice parts, is the set's unifying theme. So you can see how that works here. I'm not going to play it for you because I don't have 3 hands, but this line here that starts in the top staff, right, is imitated below, and that procedure continues throughout the piece, right? So even if you can't read music, you can tell that those the contours of the melody are generally the same, right? The Baroque flavor here is evident throughout, though it is used for romantically expressive ends. It is unsurprising that Debussy would choose to transcribe Schumann's etudes, given his interest in counterpoint and his penchant for 2 piano writing. He arranged Swan Lake for 2 pianos, Wagner opera for 2 pianos, and other of Schumann's pedal piano works for piano duo. But it is perhaps surprising to hear a work with Debussy's name on it that sounds more like Bach Invention or the Goldberg Variations than the richly harmonic soundscape for which he is so well known. The act of transcription, then, is perhaps Debussy's active homage to Schumann and to the past, influenced as it was by the German Baroque. In the immediate aftermath of World War I, Maurice Ravel seemed to be the prime candidate to fill Debussy's shoes after he died in 1918. Yet his role as the new standard-bearer of French music was contested. While some credited him with moving taste away from Debussy and Impressionism, a label which Debussy hated, others chastised him for staying too close to his 19th century roots. For the most part, the up-and-comers regarded him with disdain, but one contemporary praised his style as one that was eminently French. Louis Duret, who expressed little interest in defining a French national style, was nevertheless able to pinpoint qualities in Ravel's music that could be considered essentially French. Writing at a time when there is such an outcry for French music of France, no composer seems to me better qualified to represent it than Maurice Ravel. Reserve, clarity, and simplicity are his chief qualities, and those 3 words are words that come back time and time again in music criticism of the time to reflect music that critics find to be particularly French. To Duret, it seemed that Ravel's reserve, clarity, and simplicity stemmed from his interest in certain aspects of a new classicism that had developed in response to the tumult of the war. Neoclassicism is a term that is notoriously difficult to pin down in its ideological sense, but in its simplest sense, it marked a return to what artists and musicians viewed as classical ideals: balance, symmetry, clarity, and an economy of means that was starkly different from the experimental sounds that were being created at the same time by more modernist composers who valued reaction and novelty. Ravel's attraction to the past was widespread and varied. His piece Le Tombeau de Couperin, for example, demonstrated the depth to which the French Baroque was influential in the formation of his aesthetic and compositional style. And his setting of 5 Greek folk songs reflected the more widespread Republican allegiance to classical Greek and Rome as models for the French state. Like many of his contemporaries, Ravel found inspiration both in conventions of the past and in the music of his peers. If you have something to say, he told a former student, this something will never emerge more distinctly than in your unintended unfaithfulness to a model. The model, in the case of the piano trio, which we'll hear this afternoon, is rather eclectic. The work is dedicated to André Gadage, Ravel's counterpoint teacher, and it's a collection of movements that take various dance rhythms, poetry, and conventional musical forms as its inspiration. The pianist opens the work with a theme that Ravel referred to as Basque in color. Ravel was Basque by birth, and the first movement is said to reference the Zortziko, a Basque dance within the framework of a traditional sonata form. So this is just a little taste of the structure of the Zortziko, and it's in a traditional sort of 5/8 meter with shifts between 2 and 3. There is speculation, however, as to whether or not the theme is indeed Basque. According to Ravel's first biographer, it was what he called a café concert that inspired the theme. He said, "Our great musicians have never been ashamed of admiring a pretty tune from a café concert." It is said that it was in watching ice cream vendors dancing a fandango at Saint-Jean-de-Luz that Ravel picked up the first theme of his trio in a theme which he believed to be Basque, but wasn't. Notwithstanding the contradictory accounts as to the theme's source, Ravel's borrowings did not dilute his predilection for traditional musical forms. Though the ending of the first movement of the trio, for example, does not occur in the tonic key as we would expect, it recalls the movement's opening measures in a sort of internalized self-borrowing. The second movement of the trio, entitled Pontoon, takes its title from a Malaysian verse form in which the second and fourth lines of each four-line stanza become the first and third lines of the next. And this is a form that's featured in the song from Rodgers and Hammerstein's Flower Drum Song. If you know the piece, you might know the song. I'm going to like it here, where you can see the second and fourth lines here become the first and third lines here, and that procedure follows throughout. Though novel in conception and inspiration, the movement takes the conventional form of a scherzo. The third movement, a Passacaglia, marks Ravel's most directly neoclassical influence in the trio. The Passacaglia, a 16th century variation form in which a repeated bass line provides a static foundation for an unfolding set of variations, derives its theme from the first theme of the Pontoon, the second movement, creating in the process a network of internal borrowing that acts in essence as a microcosm for the multivalent web of influences at play in the work as a whole. Ravel and his penchant for the past stood in stark contrast to the group of composers known as Les Six, a group of which Darius Milhaud was a member. As an official group, Les Six was short-lived, but their ideologies of novelty and reaction in musical composition lingered long after they disbanded. Collectively, they regarded Ravel and his supporters with disdain, but as individuals, their aesthetic ideologies diverged. Borrowing from the past and incorporating modern-day influence was very much a part of Milhaud's musical style, a style which was forged through the combination of his heritage as a Jewish man from Provence, his acceptance of Romanticism more so than many of his peers, and his attraction to jazz, Brazilian music, and polytonal techniques. Polytonal just means using two keys at the same time. From the late 1910s, the Baroque became a strong influence on his compositional style. But just as has been the case with Couperin, Saint-Saëns, and Debussy and Ravel, it did not overshadow his individual use of more modern techniques. He frequently wrote, for example, polytonal fugues, and his fourth chamber symphony is written in the style of concerto grosso, a favorite musical form of numerous Baroque composers. Milhaud's attitude to the past and to tradition changed in the 1930s when he gained acceptance as a mainstream French composer. Here he became much more fascinated with composers from the French past. The violinist Jean-Baptiste Anet, for example, a member of Louis XIV's court, inspired his L'Apothéose de Molière. Ané, who was a pupil of Corelli's, was much like Couperin in his fusion of Italian and French musical styles. For Millot, this sort of double reunion of tastes, Couperin vis-à-vis Ané, vis-à-vis Millot, crystallized his views regarding tradition and the past. It went beyond the merely neoclassical into a deeper understanding of French musical progress as the product of one looking back on the past while simultaneously creating the way forward. His suite for violin, clarinet, and piano is likewise a sort of double borrowing. Taking the Baroque dance suite as its formal model, the suite was created through a reworking of incidental music that Millot had written for Jean Anouilh's popular play Le Voyageur sans bagage, so the traveler without baggage or luggage. The play, written in 1937, details the travails of an amnesiac soldier's return to society from an 18-year convalescence from injuries sustained in World War I. Having no memories of his past, the soldier is claimed by multiple families, and when he finally realizes what his former identity is, he struggles with reconciling his past with his present. Millot's music, on the other hand, juxtaposes past and present in ways that both enhance Anouilh's text and embody his own aesthetic ideologies. The overture features a rumba rhythm and is undoubtedly a sonic product of Millot's envoy to Brazil. It is followed by the divertissement, a combination of the polytonal and fugal writing that is so prevalent amongst his oeuvre. The third movement, entitled Jeu, meaning play, takes the form of a traditional scherzo, but is redolent of a folk dance. Some have even described it as a hoedown. Yeah, hoedown and France don't go together in my mind. Millot's affinity for jazz is made evident in the final movement, but you might also hear a reference to another popular tune, and I won't tell you what that is. I'll let you hear it for yourself. In the suite, influence from both the past and the present is eclectic and is reflective of the tendency of French musicians and composers during the interwar to adopt external, non-French styles, musics, and methods of composition, to recontextualize them, appropriate them, and subsequently label them as intrinsically French. In his book, Remaking the Past, Joseph Strauss remarked that in a musical world as heavily dominated by older music as Western Europe in the first part of the century, composers were not free to ignore their heritage. Their need to establish a position within the tradition and to assert their creative independence crucially determined the structure of their music. It is the theme of interplay between tradition, influence, and creative independence that runs through this afternoon's program. Perhaps, though, it is not so much the process of begging, borrowing, and stealing that is unfolding before us, as it is a network of influence, tradition, and homage. During the Belle Époque, there was no, to borrow from Harold Bloom, anxiety of influence. Influence, whether taken from the distant past or the tangible present, created for these composers sites of memory in which each could forge for themselves what it meant to be French, and in the end, how being French should sound. Thank you very much.